It's been 40 years now since Cronin's landmark Changes in the Land was printed. 1983, my second year of college. And this is a book that changed everything in our understanding of the Northeastern landscape. Pre-contact, I should say. He starts out in his book talking about how Henry David Thoreau and people like him, transcendentalists, had imagined a northeastern woodland where a squirrel could jump tree to tree from the Atlantic Ocean all the way to the Mississippi River. And Cronin points out the fallacy of that statement and then reconstructs the woodlands based on the archaeology and the primary source data that he had at his fingertips in 1983. And if anything, 40 years later, we're more firmly convinced that Cronin was right. Here in Southwick, Massachusetts, on the border with Connecticut, the two states have set up an ecological experiment using Cronin as a primary source for their endeavors. And what they're trying to do here, reestablish the forest that Cronin asserts existed at the time when William Pension came up the Connecticut River and established the city of Springfield in 1635. A forest that was really more field than forest. And we can see how the state of Mass on this side, Connecticut's way over there, how the state has gone in here and they have cut back the undergrowth and they're using selective burning, believe it or not. Every year they'll burn a different section of this impact area to try to reestablish the fire-tolerant species like that red pine, or is that a pitch pine? Hard to tell from here. But it's one of the fire-tolerant conifer species. We'll see a lot of oak in here, red oak and white oak. But there's also butternut, shagbark hickory, and assorted other tree species that are what we call fire-tolerant. So as the sun goes down over Congamon Lakes in the west right now, you understand that the field forest environment that I'm walking around in is generally an attempt to reconstruct that same environment that was found by William Pension and the English colonists that came up the Connecticut River in 1635 and settled in 1636 in what is now Springfield, Massachusetts, meeting the Agawam, the Congamon, the Nonotuck, and the variety of other native people that were here at the time. They found a landscape that was primarily field. And you can see that in the toponyms that they gave to the communities they established, from Westfield to Springfield, Hatfield, Greenfield, Brookfield, Infield, Suffield. There's dozens of these, even Southwick, where we are. Wick, I guess in Anglo-Saxon, means farm field. So even Southwick harkens back to that time when this landscape was a field and forest landscape with more field than forest. Now, there were copses of trees. Some of these trees were massive. Sage trees. When I say a sage tree, I mean an old tree that might be 15, 20 feet around at the base, of various species. Pension and the others described the New England landscape as resembling a park in England. And during King Philip's War, as late as that, which is 1675, the English were able to ride their horses at a full gallop right into the forests, which you can't do in a typical New England forest if you've ever been out and walked around in one. There's too many stages, there's too many thickets, and that just didn't exist. Now, why would the forests have looked this way? According to primary sources, observations made by the English, who wrote back and forth to one another. Governor wrote to governor. Magistrate wrote to magistrate. They were originally concerned by the native practice of setting fire to the undergrowth of the New England forests. They often reported that there was a willy-nilly pattern to this. They might set forests afire in the spring. They might do it in the fall. Sometimes it was done intentionally. Sometimes it was done accidentally. But the point is, fire was used. And some have asserted that they used fire as an agricultural tool. I'm sure they did to an extent. They used slash and burn farming techniques. And so what you would do is go into a copse of trees after the soil where you were planting your crops had become exhausted. You'd go into a copse of trees. You'd band, meaning you'd cut the bark off trees across maybe a 100-yard area, and that would kill the trees. And then you could plant your crops in the mounds that the native people used. They'd make a mound about 3 feet high, and they'd plant their corn in the middle, their squash around the outside, and their beans growing up the corn, working like poles. When we grow our string beans or peas, they grow up a pole. Native people are practicing subsistence farming in this area, living in a semi-sedentary way, meaning by the time you get to October, they're going off on the long hunt. They'd leave their village, and in the village they'd maybe leave 25, 30 people, usually the elderly or the very young, with some good hunters, and they would then proceed out 30 miles into the Berkshires, 25 miles into the Worcester Highlands, meeting up with other native people, basically taking advantage of the game that they would find in those areas. If you know about hunting, if you have a village of 300 or 400 people and they're all hunting, how long is the game going to survive? How long before the human scent of the hunters is going to drive off the game? These are all reasons why the native people broke up into small hunting groups. So yeah, you'd have thickets like this, and then big areas of field, and then copses of trees, and then open forest, some places near swamps, etc. Yeah, thicker forests. And in other areas, the forest would be a lot more open. There's a variety of forest types. Generally, copses of trees growing together, like almost as if they were planted, as Cronin describes in Changes in the Land, and big areas of field. And of course, the native people burn some of those fields intentionally. After they ban their trees and they plant their first year of crops, they set the undergrowth on fire, which consumes the dead trees, and there's much more light. The following year, even more. Carbon's getting into the soil in the form of charcoal. Excellent. There are, of course, reports of big blazes where fires got out of control. Well, I think hunting had a big part in it, too. And maybe technology. Have you ever worn moccasins? If you have, it's pretty good footwear, very comfortable. You can walk quietly. They're great for hunting. But then there's a problem. If you are hunting with moccasins, remember that 30 to 40% of the biomass of the trees at the time of contact in the Northeast purportedly were chestnut. And we don't have chestnut anymore. They all died in the blight 100 years ago. If you've ever been around a chestnut tree, you know that chestnuts are covered with a husk. And the husk makes a Chinese throwing star look tame. Imagine a chestnut-rich woodland with piles of chestnut husks on the ground, scattered all over by the squirrels, by the deer, by the animals that feed on this really nutritious mast. And think about it. You're walking out there trying to hunt. wearing moccasins? Imagine the damage you're doing to your tootsies when you step on a chestnut. I've always tried to think pragmatically about native people. Hunting was a huge part of their world, and of course provided a very, they don't have domesticated animals. So when they are getting protein, they're either catching fish in fish weirs or they're hunting. And the chestnut and its masses of husks would provide a really challenging environment to any hunter who wasn't careful. And if you think about the damage that you would do to your foot stepping on a chestnut, now, this is a world without backstration, without any antibiotics. Imagine how many native people would have been literally done in by a chestnut. So here in Southwick, on the border of Connecticut, we have this great field and forest environment that the two states are trying to collaborate on creating, trying to restore the woodlands to what they were. Now they're not, they are using fire, as I said, maybe not as aggressively as the native people would have, but the hope is to bring back the flora and the fauna that need fields. We always think about restoring the natural environment, and that means letting the forests grow back. If you know forests, well, how about this? Don't mow your lawn for 2 or 3 years and watch what happens. Trees want to grow, forests want to come back. And fields only exist if there's fire. That's it. What else creates fields? Either human interaction in terms of agriculture or fire. So to restore the field environment and bring back the field flora and fauna, you're going to have to either mow, cut, send a bunch of people out here with scythes. You're going to have to do something. And of course, fire was what the native people did or couldn't control. They could be accidental fires caused by lightning strikes, etc. But probably not. If you watch Fish in Historic Places, you know that what me and my buddies are doing is bringing you a little bit of fishing and outdoor action and a little bit of history. I do shorts that are about history and natural history, and at the beginning of November I decided I would start doing what I call field trips, where we basically stroll around a historic site and I kind of just gibber and babble away. I've been in the history field for my entire life, and so I figure, what the heck, let's bring you something a little different. So I hope you enjoy my little field trips, and hit me with a like and subscribe, and maybe share. Don't be selfish. As I try to bring you what I find, because that's how I make my videos. I basically go out and find things. But sometimes it's good to just get out and do some straight history. And that's my goal with these field trips. Just letting you see a little bit more than what maybe you're used to seeing. I know that when I give lectures all over Western Mass, a big misapprehension that people have is thinking that once upon a time, New England was solid forest. And look at what we got here, beautiful red pine, huh? And look at those pine cones. And you can see it's preserved here in this field forest environment because the state is getting proactive, and they've done a little bit of reading, and what they've been reading about is our land contact and, of course, Cronin, Changes in the Land, is the book you want to read if you want to start down that path, the path of Northeastern natural history.